Mitch McConnell announced yesterday that he is giving his 8 months notice as the Republican leader in the Senate. The timing, well, it's very interesting. Very interesting that he announced right now of all times. And for more on why it is Mitch McConnell made that decision, I want to bring in Sean Davis, the excellent co-founder of the Federalist, who joins us on the phone. Sean, good to have you with us. Thank you, sir.
Good to be with you. Thank you for having me.
So my understanding is Mitch McConnell's office, they knew for some time he was going to do this. This was always the plan. He's going to go. But why did he announce it right now of all times? If given that he could have chosen any day to do it, why did he choose yesterday?
Right. So from the people in the Senate I've talked to, and they're people who worked there for a long time, what they believe happening is that there was a soft coup developing within the Republican conference due to McConnell's bumbling of the awful border amnesty bill.
Right.
And you had a number of senators who were getting ready to call a vote in the conference to remove him. And he was starting to get concerned that was going to get some momentum. And so this announcement was meant to preserve his power while somewhat neutering that effort. Because if he's just going to retire in 8 months or whatever, well, obviously having a vote now would be pointless. So it was, as all things that Mitch McConnell does, completely calculated to maximize his own power.
For sure. And we saw in the past couple weeks, it felt unusual to me. I'd love to get your assessment, but you started to see more and more senators go on the record with their frustrations, whether it was, the Ron Johnsons or J.D. Vance or Mike Lee or Ted Cruz or Rand Paul and, of course, Rick Scott. More and more Republican senators willing to say out loud in public that they're unhappy with Mitch McConnell and his leadership. Was this an unusual amount of consternation?
Oh, absolutely, because Mitch McConnell controls the conference by controlling outside money that he uses to either pour into your race and help you, or he uses it to pour into a primary opponent's race that he recruits to crush you. And so many of these senators are terrified just because of the amount of money that McConnell controls. But when the cracks really started developing were last year during yet another one of these crazy Ukraine bills where he was wanting to force through some sort of standalone Ukraine bill, and very unusually within the conference, he had people stand up publicly. I think even John Thune at one point, which is completely shocking, saying, hey, this isn't the right thing for us to be doing now. This looks crazy. So the cracks were developing months ago. And then when he completely bungled this amnesty thing for Biden, putting his own party in a terrible spot, that was kind of the, we'll mix metaphors here, the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yes.
People had just had enough at that point, and they moved from private grumbling to public recrimination.
Well, the other piece is I worry that now that he's made this announcement, he's going to even be more distant from the concerns of Republican voters. Like, he's not even going to pretend to care about them. Earlier this week at the White House meeting between Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, and Mike Johnson, apparently Mike Johnson was the only one in the room raising that we need to secure our own border first before we do anything about Ukraine. And Chuck Schumer was bragging that Mitch McConnell was allied with the rest of them.
Yeah, it's a little shocking just to see it so out front. What I found most interesting about this whole thing was the timing that he picked for his successor to be elected, which is November. And that's a really, really odd time because you would think we've got an election there. Shouldn't it be these new senators? There's going to be a whole crop of them. Shouldn't they have a say in who the new leader is? And so that would generally be a vote you would have in January when you have the new Congress constituted. And instead, McConnell arbitrarily set this date. So he gets to have all his power between now and then gets to have a hand in picking his own successor by boxing out anyone who wins that election and comes into office new. To me, it was shockingly craven, even for McConnell to do, and I'm surprised that particular date hasn't gotten more attention.
Do you think that this is an effort to subvert Trump's agenda as he comes into office?
Absolutely. I mean, Mitch McConnell right now is devoted to two things. He's devoted to funneling as much money to Ukraine as possible for reasons I don't understand, and defeating Trump. And by clinging to power until the election, he's able to do that. And then on top of that, he may even, if Trump wins, be able to pick a successor who can hamstring Trump long after McConnell's gone.
Among the people who are jockeying to be the successor, the first up today was Senator John Cornyn of Texas. He made this announcement that he'd like to to be the new leader. I also noticed that in the last 24 hours, he's been spending his time on Twitter attacking Attorney General Ken Paxton in Texas. I'm confused. He wants to be the Republican leader in the Senate, but he's attacking people who are well-liked by the base?
Well, I feel like he's continuing the fine tradition in GOP leadership of hating his own voters and not doing anything to further their own priorities. So it was very on brand for him. I will say I find his leadership bid a bit odd because he is deeply unpopular among Republicans in that state. He's up for election in 2026 if he chooses to run again. And I would think the last thing that the party would want is to elect a new leader and then immediately watch him get beaten in a primary 2 years later. So I am honestly a little bit confused by his leadership bid. Maybe he thinks it strengthens his hand in the primary, for all I know.
Is there who do you think is realistic as a replacement for McConnell? Whether it comes from the McConnell camp of the Senate or from somebody who might be more aligned with Donald Trump's agenda. Who are the legitimate candidates in your view?
Well, I don't think there's anyone who is viable in that they can get a majority of the votes there in that conference who is Trump sympathetic. So I think your three top candidates are the Johns: John Cornyn, John Thune, who's a taller, younger, thinner version of McConnell, and then John Barrasso. There's kind of a dark horse out there in Steve Daines, who might be viewed as the Trump candidate. But I think that particular conference, the way it's made up in the Senate, is so detached from the concerns of the voters. I think it's a long shot that you'd have anyone in that position who's even remotely sympathetic to what Trump or his voters want.
Right. So I know the only senator who publicly announced a willingness to run against McConnell in the past was Rick Scott. But there's no constituency among the other Republicans in the Senate, at least the establishment ones, to support a guy like Rick.
Right. And, it's interesting. The number that Mitch McConnell always cared about when he was a leader, it was not 51. His goal was not getting 51 Republican senators. This past election, his goal was to have 25 or 26. That's what he cared about, was having a majority of the conference who would vote for him. And so he went about picking senators and races and primaries who would be loyal to him and would give him that magic majority number. And because of that, you have a conference in the Senate that is just not particularly geared toward what voters want in a particular election. They're really divorced from it. And so unlike the House where it's pretty well representative of the people, the Senate, most senators there just don't really care. I think a lot of them are quietly hostile to Trump, even though they might give some lip service to him.
Yep.
But overall, there's no majority there for an actual conservative to be leader.
Don't you think that Donald Trump can wield a lot of power in this decision, though? I mean, he's as the nominee and then as perhaps the president of the United States incoming, this is a big moment for him to place pressure, if he so desires, on who becomes the next leader, correct?
It is, but unlike the House, where every single person who's going to be voting for speaker, whoever, is going to face re-election and they're going to have to go up against maybe someone who Trump endorses, you've only got 33 senators in the entire body who are up this round. And of those, I don't have the map in front of me, there might only be 15 or 20 Republicans, and they might already be in super safe races. So just the makeup of it and the way the map is this year, the Trump influence is really only felt on the margin in these races. And there's the other dynamic. These are always such insular, inside baseball, clubby races that it is rare, in my experience, for outside pressure to ever matter that much.
Interesting.
It's a backroom deal.
Although I will say, maybe I'm overly encouraged by it, but the defeat of the amnesty bill in the Senate was a result of the outside pressure, I thought. That the base really paid attention. They read the details of the bill. They got a hold of these senators, and they strangled them until they got rid of this thing. And my sense is that Republican senators right now are nervous about running too far afoul of what the base actually wants for this country.
I think that's right, and I'll say I was actually shocked at how successful the effort was to take that bill down, because normally they're impervious to it, and I have to give the credit to Elon Musk. I don't think that happens under the previously throttled Twitter, where the left controlled everything and banned anyone they didn't like. The ability to actually have a free and open discourse about that bill is what killed it.
While I have you, Sean Davis, because you're such an insightful observer of all of these things, if I could ask you about the House side, Mike Johnson is Speaker of the House right now. There was some hope that he's got a conservative past and maybe he's going to have a conservative tenure as Speaker. This week he seems to be the only person who's even raising the issue of the border inside of these important meetings. What do you make of his tenure, and how hopeful are you for him going forward?
I'm not hopeful at all. I think it's been an absolute disappointment. It has been really disheartening to see him make these big, bold statements and then slowly walk them back and eventually fold. He hasn't passed one single piece of legislation that had more Republican votes than Democrats. Every bill that's come out had more Democrat votes. So there's still a chance for him to find a spine, between now and April. But I will tell you, I don't have a lot of confidence, and I think overall he's been an extreme disappointment so far.
How big of a deal would it be for Donald Trump to be reelected in terms of having an influence on how these members of Congress act?
Oh, I think in the House, I think he has a lot of power, and I think if he's reelected, he's the new agenda setter. He's the head of the party. He's calling the shots. I think that changes everything.
All right. Well, one can hope. Sean Davis, thank you very much, co-founder of The Federalist. Just excellent everywhere he produces work, including the conversation today. Thank you, Sean. Good to talk to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Take care.
That's Sean Davis. Just the best. You should definitely follow him on X.